Good morning. My name is Stephanie Puen, and my contribution to this panel on women is on caring justice as an important concept to develop in Catholic social thought and theology. It's important to talk about women's contexts, especially on how COVID-19 has affected many women. Then I'd like to talk about caring justice, an important concept a colleague, Dr. Rachel Sanchez, and I are working on, which we think is an important path forward for the church and society in addressing women's needs in the future, and an important contribution that the Catholic Church can and should foster to address women's needs. To begin, a just society would recognize women's work in the home and in the workplace as a valuable contribution to the common good and promote women's well-being and flourishing as individuals. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought long-standing injustices against working women to the fore and has exacerbated these, framed through the tension of balancing women's needs versus the survival of the business and economy. Women are among the many vulnerable groups affected heavily by the pandemic. Statistically, most of those who lost work and were hard hit were women. All over the world, women have been hit harder by the pandemic, leading some to call the global recession as a she-cession. She-cession refers to the disproportionate impact of a pandemic recession on working women, which leads to greater gender inequality. In the US, at least one study showed that the pandemic has lowered not just women's labor supply but also their wages, worsening an already yawning gender wage gap. UN Women, drawing from the UN Secretary-General's policy brief on COVID-19 and women, UN Women's Spotlight on Gender, COVID-19 and the SDGs, UN thematic policy briefs focused on COVID-19, and data from the UN Women's Rapid Gender Assessment, estimates that 740 million women work in the informal economy, and that globally they lost an average of 60% of their income. Industries and sectors that are dominated by women, particularly those in care industries, are more vulnerable to the negative impacts of the pandemic, with women's employment being 19% more at risk compared to men, and with 70% of health and social care workers being women. These existing studies similarly highlight the gendered impact of the pandemic on women's work despite different societal contexts. A similar pattern of unequal gender division negatively affecting Philippine women's work can be established based on international data and local essays or news articles. Related literature concerning women's work during the pandemic account for the gender dimension involved, but these hardly tackle the role of religion and the Christian response needed for working women during this crisis. Delving into the Philippine context, 64% of working Filipino women reported that COVID-19 had adversely affected them. Because of this, the COVID-19 pandemic threatens some of the progress made in achieving gender equality in the global workplace, as working women are forced to take on expanded duties at home and at work at the expense of their mental and physical health. Exacerbated by the pandemic, women have had to work from home and work at home. The expectation to take care of the home as well as work their job has become more prominent and taxing as Filipino women began working from home due to the pandemic. This has thus contributed to women having to let go of work due to the extraordinary demands of childcare amid the pandemic. Parents who should otherwise be working are finding themselves having to stay at home and look after their kids, especially to oversee their kids' online education. Mothers might bear the brunt of this task. Data show that women outnumber men in the ranks of those newly not in the labor force. The double burden of having to take care of domestic duties as well as their career because of patriarchal expectations has also worsened by the increase also in domestic violence, correlated with the increasing isolation of being stuck at home together with loss of income, basic needs, and social safety nets. Thus, while the pandemic has had a negative effect on many different communities, the emerging research and data reveals the extra toll this unprecedented disruption has had on women, who are traditionally expected to shoulder most, if not all, household and childcare responsibilities, even as they build their careers here in the Philippines. The pandemic has also affected women working for the Catholic Church and the ritual of parish life and attending Mass that anchors people. Thus, the parish, even here in the Philippines, has had to adapt its rituals for people to participate in, not only for the good of the people but also for the parish, as the parish relies heavily on donations, which have decreased during the pandemic. The work of adapting to the quote-unquote new normal has fallen on the shoulders of the people running the parish daily activities, who are mostly women. Frequently described as the backbone of parishes, women have filled many administrative roles in parishes, and the forced changes brought about by the pandemic has made the work of women more difficult, given limited resources here in Philippine parishes. The UN has also identified three major recommendations that ought to be included in a gender-aware response to COVID-19. First, there should be investments in universal, gender-responsive social protection systems to support women's income security. Second, there should be expanded access to affordable, quality childcare services to enable women to remain in or re-enter the workforce. And lastly, there should be a reversal of long-standing inequalities, including unequal division of work at home, the gender pay gap, and pervasive undervaluation of work done by women. However, part of the problem in responding to women's needs and operationalizing these recommendations is that care is undervalued. Since it is primarily associated with women, it has led to an undervaluing of women's labor and contributions to society, not just in the Philippines but elsewhere, as seen in the third recommendation of the UN. Care has also been marginalized in political and macroeconomic discourse, which also serves as a way to analyze what is lacking in present society and imagine alternatives and solutions to the issues that women and society face. Thus, knowing this situation, it is important to ask, how do we care in ways that are responsive to the needs of women today and to show how important care is? Work that Dr. Rachel Sanchez and I are doing on talks about caring justice as an important consideration in responding to the situation of women. We would like to highlight three aspects of caring justice in particular. So first, caring for or taking care of and responsibility. Second, the care receiving and responsiveness. And third, caring with and solidarity, based on Joanne Tronto's work on an ethic of care and Catholic social thought, which I think is an important contribution that the Church can foster with and for women, not just here in the Philippines or Southeast Asia, but also in other communities. So first, caring for or taking care of and responsibility. Caring for or taking care of the one cared about entails taking on responsibility for the unmet need and finding ways to address it. It also involves recognizing that one has the capacity to respond to the need. A sense of responsibility comes from interconnected social relationships where a person recognizes that one has done or has failed to do something that has contributed to the needs of others, and so the person should care. Concretely, caring for another from a sense of responsibility entails taking on the burden of meeting the other's unmet needs. The interconnectedness from which a sense of responsibility emerges is akin to Catholic social thought's notion of fraternity and is further enhanced by it. The culture of caring in Catholic social thought is situated within the context of universal fraternity. Hence, this culture is not just for one's kin or nation or in-group, but rather meant to include all, especially the vulnerable and wounded. This culture is also meant to succeed with everyone's contribution, with participation at the grassroots level and synergy and collaboration at the level of institutions and higher organizations. In relation to this phase of caring, privileged irresponsibility is not only a form of ignorance, but also a form of excusing oneself from taking responsibility for caring. For instance, Joanne Tronto gives the example of a breadwinner and head of a traditional household, usually a man, who excuses himself from the responsibility of caring for the home and doing domestic chores because he is already the provider of the family. This would explain why many working mothers find themselves overcompensating and taking on more household responsibilities, despite some instances where working from home has become possible for both parents. Next, the second aspect of caring I want to emphasize is the acknowledgement that reception on the part of the object of care is also important. This stage makes the moral quality of responsiveness important in the actualization of care. When a person gives care to a person, group, or object, the person, group, or object responds in various ways. Some ways can be explicit, like words of gratitude. Some responses can be less explicit, like a child becoming strong from healthy food or a plant growing from being watered. Responsiveness entails mutuality in that the person caring must observe these responses with a sensitivity to needs that have not been met or new needs that may arise, thus continuing the process of care. Rather than seeking to understand the needs of others by putting oneself in their position, the kind or responsiveness here involves considering the position of the other as expressed by the other. The caregiver engages the perspective of the care receiver without assuming that people are the same and interchangeable. The various needs that have emerged in the situation of the pandemic have called for urgent responses from governments and businesses. Joanne Tronto's caring framework and Catholic social thought are reminders to also observe the effect of one's decisions, even though these are intended to help others, and then listen to feedback. Caring about women would therefore eventually entail listening to women's voices and what they have to say about the different arrangements or possibilities presented to them during the pandemic. Moreover, Tronto adds that there is a need to keep a balance between the needs of the caregiver and care receivers. This comment is especially relevant to mothers who are working during the pandemic. Many of them are caregivers of their children, but they also have their own needs. Lastly, caring with and solidarity, plurality, communication, trust, and respect. Caring with entails plurality, communication, trust, and respect, as these qualities will enable people to see caring as a social activity and collective responsibility, where everyone can be involved in a democracy as receiving and giving care. Caring with one another is also expressed in Catholic social thought and Laudato Si, for example, which emphasizes solidarity and plurality by calling for participation and inclusion amidst diversity. Such a community includes each person's active inclusion and participation. This culture of care thus also reminds society of the importance of solidarity, which, as a moral virtue and social attitude born of personal conversion, calls for commitment on the part of those responsible for education and formation. This implies solidity, born of the consciousness that we are responsible for the fragility of others as we strive to build a common future. When we speak of the need to care for our common home, our planet, we appeal to that spark of universal consciousness and mutual concern that may still be present in people's hearts. In Catholic social thought, the quality of communication is often expressed as dialogue. Dialogue and solidarity are not just private matters, but are also crucial in the functioning of social systems and structures. Dialogue plays an important role in fostering a culture of care, especially in response to fear, uncertainty, and conflict. The ability to sit down and listen to others, typical of interpersonal encounters, is paradigmatic of the welcoming attitude shown by those who transcend narcissism and accept others, caring for them and welcoming them into their lives. Being able to encounter and handle conflict without withdrawing away or creating violence is crucial, especially in ensuring that no one is forgotten or left behind. Dealing with fear, uncertainty, and conflict in a healthy manner is formed through an appreciation of one's own identity in relation to others, in the family, in one's local community, in social institutions, and even across borders. The pandemic has brought both interconnectivity and social inequality to the fore. This notion of caring as caring with is therefore very apt. In the Philippines, caring with is expressed through the community pantries that began with the initiative of one Filipina, Ana Patricia Non, who could no longer merely stand by while so many are suffering. However, there's also a danger of merely romanticizing the community pantries or the Philippine spirit of bayanihan, without seeing the need that catalyzes it. The qualities of caring with also challenges society, governments, and broader institutions to recognize the need behind why these pantries became widespread and to cooperate with people and promote just social transformation in response to that need. To conclude, caring justice as a concept we think is important for women moving forward in the church and is something that the church can continue to foster. Care is an important part of Catholic theology, church history, and mission of spreading the gospel, where we are called to care for others in the spirit of the common good, giving each what is due to them in justice. This is especially important for vulnerable groups such as women in the church and in the world, where women take on many burdens or are often not given what is due to them, nor are they taken care of with love. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to our conversation today.